The epic revolves around the struggle for the throne of Hastinapura. The two collateral branches of the family that participate in the struggle are the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The Kauravas were collectively the 100 sons of the blind king Dhritarashtra, and the Pandavas were the 5 sons of Pandu. The 5 brothers named Yudhisthira, also known as Dharmaraja, the eldest one, Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, and Sahadeva were always obedient and dutiful. Draupadi was the common wife of the 5 Pandavas. The Kauravas behaved viciously and brutally towards the Pandavas in many ways. Their malice displayed itself when they took advantage of the eldest Pandava, Yudhishthira, in the game of dice. Living in the new territory of Indraprastha, Yudhishthira turns his poor land into a wealthy kingdom and declares himself as king of kings. Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas, was jealous and humiliated when he once visited the magnificent palace. He mistakes a glass floor for a pool and then falls into the pool thinking it is glass. Draupadi and Bhima laugh at him. He returns home bent on devising their destruction from that day. So Duryodhana follows the advice of his uncle, the cunning Shakuni, an infamous dice player, and invites Yudhishthira to the game of dice. They know well that gambling is Yudhishthira's one weakness. Vidura is sent to invite the Pandavas to visit Hastinapura and play a game of dice there. Yudhishthira accepts the invitation, but both Dhritarashtra and Yudhishthira ignore Vidura's warning to avoid the game, which may result to a destructive consequence. Shakuni was confident that he could defeat Yudhishthira easily, and thus Duryodhana could fulfill his ill motive of outdoing the Pandavas. Before the game, a lot of discussions were happening, but Yudhishthira is obliged to play. Shakuni comes into play for Duryodhana. During the event, Yudhishthira stakes his wealth, jewelry, Indraprastha, his kingdoms and his belongings, also the belongings of his wife, and one after the other he starts losing everything. Shakuni, being himself, keeps mocking and provoking Yudhishthira at each stage and demands something or the other at stake. He thus loses his brothers, Nakula and Sahadeva too. Shakunu mocks him, those are the step-brothers he lost, but Arjuna and Bhima are not so, and he won't bet them. This forces Yudhishthira to stake Arjuna and hid deliberately at the stake as demanded by Shakuni. At this moment of his complete defeat, including himself, Yudhishthira is again mocked to stake Draupadi. Yudhishthira stakes Draupadi and loses her also. There were strong reactions from the assembly and the crowd gathered in the kingdom to watch the game. When Yudhishthira staked her, Draupadi questions the legality of staking her, and she was forced and dragged in front of the entire assembly. There were favoring reactions to her questions. Interestingly, Vikarna, a younger brother of Duryodhana, reacts in support of Draupadi. He says courageously that Yudhishthira is enticed to play the game deeply plotted by Duryodhana and Shakuni, and that a lost Yudhishthira has not the right to stake Draupadi, as he is already lost. The assembly supported him, but Karna silenced him and said that he is too young before the others in the hall to speak that way. Duryodhana in the open court chides Draupadi and invites her to sit on his thigh, patting and bearing his thigh. He orders Dusasana to disrobe her in front of the court. Dusasana begins to execute the act, but Draupadi cannot be bared as Lord Krishna helped her. She is endowed with the divine grace of being in a new dress to whatever extent the clothes were pulled by Dusasana one after the other. Dusasana fails and is exhausted. The assembly stands stunned at this miracle. Bhima sends shivering signals by oath that he will tear open Dusasana's heart and drink the blood of him, and he shall break the thigh of Duryodhana on which Draupadi was tauntingly invited to sit. The invincible Draupadi, by the divine blessings of Krishna, made Dhritarashtra still more afraid of the Pandavas. He asks to pardon, and Draupadi releases all that was won in dice event. So this way, they return whatever was won in the game of dice. Of course, dissatisfied at Dhritarashtra's act, Shakuni and Duryodhana once again plead before Dhritarashtra for another last dice game with Yudhishthira. In the second spell of the dicing event, Yudhishthira is again defeated and is forced to go for exile for 12 years. The condition was that they should live in a forest and pass the 13th year disguised without being identified by anybody. If they are identified by anybody during the period of disguise, they should repeat the 12 years of exile in forest and the 13th year in disguise. Thus, losers in the deceitful act of gambling and insulted by Kauravas, the Pandavas started for their exile in forest. Vidura told Yudhishthira to allow Mother Kunti to stay back as she was old and weak. Yudhishthira agrees. Draupadi, however, accompanied her husbands to the forest. Duryodhana became the de facto ruler of both Hastinapura and Indraprastha. The Pandavas were not alone in the forest, but are followed by many loyal Brahmins and servants. The gods give them an inexhaustible supply of food for all of them. Pandavas reached Kamyak forest and decided to rest there for a while. Krishna comes to help them. After inquiring about their well-being, he advised the Pandavas to be vigilant and not to lose heart. The ordeal they had faced was for their good. Good and bad experiences are essential to correct perspective and fulfillment of life. Suffering and sorrow brings requisite feeling and renunciation, essential to seek higher goals in life. The future of the Pandavas was determined by the game of dice. They had to undergo plight and sufferings due to their defeat in the game. Yudhishthira's temptation brought about that unexpected consequence. His wife Draupadi and his younger brothers fell victims to this horrible experience. The tragic fate of the Pandavas was another consequence of the dice game. Why did Yudhishthira agree to play the game of dice? The reason that is most often cited is that he had a weakness for the game and couldn't resist an invite to play the game. This is often used to show Yudhishthira as a weak and gullible fool in the newer retellings of the Mahakavya. Nothing could be further from the truth. While it is true that Dharmaraja did have a weakness for the game, on top of being unskilled at it, he, however, did not jump at the opportunity to match wits against someone of the caliber of Shakuni, who was the undisputed master of the game and had an uncanny knack of always winning against an opponent through means fair and foul. To assist him were his three brothers, Duryodhana, Vimimsati, Purumitra, and Chitrasena. All three were experts at the game. It was an unequal contest with the dice loaded against Yudhishthira right from the beginning. So why did he agree to the contest? Was it just his lust for the game? A deeper reading of the Mahabharata tells us that Yudhishthira not only knew what was at stake, but actually did not want to get into the game. He knew that it was sure to end in utter ruin for himself and the Pandavas, but also for the entire Kuru race. Just before this invitation of the dice game, Yudhishthira had conducted the Rajasuya Yagna, where Sisupala was killed by Krishna. The evil omens and portents had been witnessed by all who had assembled there that day, and Vyasa had confirmed to Yudhishthira that this was only the beginning of the next 14 years that would be terrible for the Pandavas and that would be followed by a terrible internal war that would cause the destruction of almost the entire Kuru race. Yudhishthira had decided then that he would do nothing to provoke anyone within that extended family in order that such an event must never come to pass. This was also and always on his mind. Therefore, there are several reasons beside his fondness or weakness for gambling. In fact, given a choice, he would have rejected the invite, but he could not do so because he was a Kshatriya ruler, dictated that he could not reject the invitation without being called a coward. And apart from this, he would never disobey his elders. He already knew that fate and God's will were settling and the wheel of the motion was already moving and nothing can ever change what is written in fate. So his desire and love for the game was the last and the least of all the reasons.